Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So I've been hearing a lot of people that have been critical of the lockdown, of the strategies in Ontario and Canada and Toronto in regards to COVID-19 and how we're dealing with it. And so I thought that I'd connect back in with Alex Vezina, who's the CEO of Prepared Canada. He's an emergency preparedness expert, and Prepared Canada is an emergency preparedness company. Alex has been on my show a few times before, and I just want to ask him a bunch of quick questions and get some quick answers that I think a lot of us have been asking ourselves. So Alex, number one, welcome to the show. Number two, people say lockdowns are doing more harm than good. What do you say to that?
That's a very broad question. That's kind of open to interpretation. It depends. So there are different types of harm, and that's a very big question that needs to be refined further.
Okay, so let me refine it. So people say lockdowns impact health, mental health, increase in overdoses, suicidal thoughts, economic and socioeconomic problems need to be factored into our decision making.
Okay, well, if they need to be factored into our decision making, yes, I generally agree with that. I think that they haven't really been factored into our decision making to the same degree that we would have liked. They haven't been really outright ignored. I've heard some people say that we don't care about mental health at all, or we don't care about businesses. And I think the fact that we're doing half measures at all, and that with the Ontario example specifically, with how pro-business our premier tends to be, the idea that we're ignoring business entirely, I think, is more than a bit of a stretch. But in general, no, I don't think that we've factored in the secondary consequences for this, for the long-term strategic planning enough. And I have issues with the lack of contingency planning that we've done in general, and that's part of it. If that's too complex, please ask me to refine, because I know that was very word salad.
Oh, it's okay. People have, commented the focus has been primarily on COVID-19, and other concerns have been ignored or not addressed.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same type of deal, right? It's the same question, essentially, of why aren't we focusing on this and this and this more? And it's a bit complicated, but the reality is that doctors, by and large, speaking specifically of public health doctors, medical officers of health, etc., have been in the driver's seat of the strategic decision making. It is a pandemic, and the primary hazard at play here is a virus. So it stands to reason that epidemiologists and medical officers of health that run the communicable diseases division of our healthcare system, as the heads of those agencies, would have a lot of weight in the decision making. The thing that I think a lot of people aren't considering, which comes into that, is all experts have some degree of tunnel vision. We have some degree of looking much harsher at things that we're very experienced in, and less harsher at things that we have less experience in. And one of the byproducts of dealing with a lot of people who really focus on physical health and viruses is they tend to have huge blind spots for the other things. And the thing is, the doctors haven't said otherwise. They've, in most cases, said that it's not their mandate, or that this isn't their wheelhouse, or they can speak to things on health, but they can't speak to the economy, etc. I think the problem, as why we haven't addressed the rest of this, fundamentally comes down to we've been asking doctors to make decisions that they are openly admitting they don't have the experience to make decisions on, in effect. Although they're not making the decisions, they're providing the advice that is becoming the decision in effect. So it's an unrealistic ask.
But isn't that the job of the political masters, to make decisions based on not only what one expert, one public health expert might be saying, but to balance the points of views of numerous different people and different stakeholders?
Political actors and political agents aren't trained to operate on short timetables in a crisis. That's what you have in some countries the military for, and that's what you have in our country and in most countries in the civilian side emergency management professionals for. It's not their function. The function of making short-term decisions in a crisis is strictly the purview of people who specialize in making short-term decisions in a crisis. As has been
So it
said
sounds like you're agreeing with this argument that we have neglected mental health and a whole bunch of other issues and only focused on the public health issue.
Yes and no. So I'm agreeing with it in principle, but I'm disagreeing with the way it's being characterized, because there is a valid reason as to why it's been done. Specifically valid because you have to understand how the system has failed. The issue isn't directly that we haven't focused on them. The issue is we haven't had the people in place so that they can be focused on at all. The people that need to be in place so that we can even consider those things at a high level, at like a very 50,000 feet strategic level, they aren't in place at all. You'll hear in the news in recent in recent history. He's on air, and becoming more prevalent in the news with myself this week and last week. David Redman, the former lieutenant colonel. Same thing as myself in terms of we're both in emergency preparedness or emergency management. Also coming out and saying that we've basically had some sort of pandemic plan, but it either A, wasn't sufficient, or B, was thrown out the window because the emergency management people who know how to do this and know how to deal with this problem and who look widely, that aren't tunnel vision, generally speaking, aren't in play. We're not the people who help you make.
So you're saying that you think that the emergency preparedness people should have been controlled, not the public health people, and they would have balanced more of the issues.
It's not about being in control. And what an emergency prepared, because when you say control, people start thinking about draconianism generally. So what an emergency management or emergency preparedness person tends to do is in a command center or in a decision structure, they're basically the translator for professionalism. So where you might have 4 or 5 different specialists, your police chief, your fire chief, your medical officer of health, your politician, who are all speaking different languages with different objectives, the emergency management person knows how to take that all in and make sure that the crosstalk doesn't get too complicated and that they're meeting a common goal and objective. Because the emergency manager is the one looking at the big picture. So it's not about being in control. It's about being the person who can facilitate mistakes happening less often.
We're chatting tonight with Alex Vezina, the CEO of Prepared Canada. He's an emergency preparedness expert. And I'm trying to ask him a bunch of questions that some of the people that have been questioning the Ontario lockdown have been asking and see what his response is. We're going to take a break and come back after a few messages. More with Alex Vezina. Stay with us. We're back with Alex Vezina, the CEO of Prepared Canada, talking about COVID-19 and some of the criticisms of the Ontario Canada response that have been labeled, and I'm getting Alex Vezina's point of view. Alex, the school reopening has been an issue where some people have said that we should be reopening schools, and then other people have said, no, we should be closing the schools. And then the first people said, oh, now we're reopening the schools, so it's proof that before we've met all the criteria that the public health people said, and so therefore it's proof that our initial criticisms of the lockdown were appropriate. And finally, people are hearing us. Where do you come out on all this?
So specifically, the question is, what is my opinion on the reopening of school, or what? Because there's a few questions.
Yeah, and the critics of Doug Ford's plan, I think, have said because we're reopening the schools prior to us actually achieving the criteria that was set out for the reopening, it's proof that closing them was the wrong decision, or keeping them closed was the wrong decision, and now we're reopening them.
Okay, so a few things have come out in the last few weeks that kind of changed the game on schools in particular, and it hasn't really been picked up on, and something that people need to consider. The Centers for Disease Control, which is the United States big federal public health agency, and a few other larger agencies around the world, have determined that it looks like COVID is less transmissive than we expect from children. So this isn't that COVID is less fatal with children, but it's less transmissive. The whole argument behind why we were stopping everyone from going everywhere is we didn't want transmissions to go from person to person to person and basically ricochet into someone who is vulnerable and kill them. If you have a group of people that are significantly less transmissive, then your math changes. So everyone already agreed that, and I with rare exception here, that school is critically important for children in terms of development, mental health, general socialization. School is important for children. We both agree. No one contests that. Yes?
Yep.
Okay, so we're fine there. So whenever you're making a decision like this, when you're in a half measure style system, so when you're not doing the total lock everything down, zero COVID cases strategy, which we've never done, which is like the Australia model that we're just not doing. When you're in a half measure system, you have to weigh cost benefit against what you're losing against how many cases that you are likely to spread when you do or don't do something. So if it looks like that children will not likely spread, or they're one of the lowest risk groups for spreading the virus, not dying from the virus, because remember, dying is a completely different thing altogether, but the spreading of it, then you can give special consideration to things that children do, as long as you can control for the adults who work there so that the adults don't spread with each other, because you still have an employee problem. So the point is, the math has changed slightly on schools because of what the CDC has found. Now, we don't know exactly what it
why is it that it's less transmittable by kids?
We don't know. It just appears that with schools being open, as far as I'm aware, it appears that they are just getting it less often. We're not sure why yet, as far as I can tell.
That's interesting.
We don't. There's no real.
Some of the critics of the current lockdown have been saying that the rate of infection may be up, but the rate of mortality is way down, and so therefore we don't need to lock down this time.
That's not exactly true. The rate of mortality is up almost everywhere. I mean, if you, a lot of the same critics have compared Ontario to Florida and said that Florida is doing comparatively better. And then when you look at the numbers, Florida is doing comparatively worse. So there's some data fudging going on. But
so
I mean, that's beside the point, though.
The percentage of people that get the virus that end up either in ICU or dying, is that better or worse now than it was in the spring?
You should see an indication for it getting better because we're testing more people. So you're capturing more of the total number of people that are actually infected. However, my industry in general, and most of the people who've been consistent on the epidemiology side, assumed that we weren't catching everyone originally anyways. So all of our estimations and what we should be doing with the public were based on the assumption that we were seeing more spread than we were catching regardless. If you remember the conversations we had in March and April of 2020, I was giving you ranges based on an expectation of between 1% to 6%. When you're above 1%, it's still a problem. Do you recall?
Yep.
So it's not so safe or so non-infectious that it's still not an issue. So the argument's moot. It doesn't really make a difference. It's similar to the arguments where you hear that COVID is just like the common flu, where we've had less than 100 flu deaths in Ontario, last year. Or no, I have to check again to quote, but it's considerably less. And then you look at the COVID deaths and they're off the charts, and they say, well, that means that COVID's not a problem. You say, no, we put all these controls in and COVID still killed more people than the flu. It's like making cars illegal and then people still dying of more car accidents. Like, evidently there's a problem with your cars. Does that analogy make sense, Brian?
Yep. No, that makes sense.
Okay. So anyways, that's kind of the problem there. So there's a lot in there. It's kind of, it's a complex issue. If that's in any way not clear, or if you feel that the question hasn't been directly answered, please ask again, because I want to make sure people are clear on this stuff, and I don't like not answering questions.
Okay. So, some politicians in Ontario have been using Florida as an example, as we talked about a couple of minutes ago, and saying Florida has been far more open, allowed people to circulate in the economy far more widely without masks, not been nearly as restrictive, and Florida is doing well. And you've got some statistics that you told me that were contrary to that.
Yeah, so Florida is doing well comparatively to Florida previously, which is a bit different because everyone's doing comparatively better to when they were in Christmas, because you have increased spread rates during Christmas. That's just kind of an assumption in a Western society. But when you compare Florida and Ontario, for example, you look at where are the numbers here? Just as an example, this was taken last Saturday or Sunday. 7,500 cases for a population of 21.48 million for Florida. 1,400 cases.
Is that in total or for a certain length of time?
That's a per day.
Per day,
That's
on
per day.
average now, or
No,
on
that's the number from like a day or two ago.
okay, so it's a
maybe
1 day
3 days.
number. Okay.
So it's like the 1 day number, 7,500, and then Ontario is 1,400. Now Florida has more people than Ontario, but it's not way more people. So they have a population of 21 million. We have a population of 14. So just so you get an idea, right? Ontario has about 2/3 the population of Florida, but only 20% of the cases. So we have a smaller population by 1/3, but we have a smaller number of cases by 4/5,
80%.
which is huge.
Okay. What about
so proportionately, because you have to account for proportionality with all of this. You can't go exact numbers against exact numbers, right? So the point is that we're doing significantly better. So doing a comparison with Florida to Ontario is ridiculous. There's no point in doing that. If you're going to do like a progressively over time, how we're doing week to week as a proportionate for how we were doing last week, maybe, but that's way too convoluted for what we're talking about. The win with Florida, and this is not what I'm seeing argued, which is frankly bonkers to me. What I wish people would argue, because it is interesting, is Florida is actually doing very well on its policy side because they have significantly less density in their grocery stores. They actually have significantly lower risk of catching spread in their grocery stores than we do. We have is
that a mandate?
They didn't close their small businesses, and the thing is, in addition to that, what's really interesting is with all pandemics, you don't just spread to everyone around you. You spread to people generally who are like-minded in a cluster, because you don't, if, for example, you are someone who is very pro-doctor, you don't tend to have a lot of friends who are anti-maskers. Right? So the anti-maskers tend to spread to the anti-maskers, and the pro-doctor people tend to spread to the pro-doctor people, with some bridging when they live in the same family. So in Florida, because people are generally so divided, the groups of people who follow the masking and etc. are spread apart and tend to keep away from the other and don't get infected as often. Because people, it's strange. It's one of the net positives of tribalism and bigotry, where when you don't like those people and you think they're gross and you want to keep away from them, you don't get infected by them. It's sociologically really interesting. But anyways, Florida, because it's so polarized, with the way the politics are in the States and etc. If you go down there and you obey masking and you hang out with those types of people, and if you're going to quarantine at home and then go to the grocery store, you frankly have less risk, arguably, than you have here, because there's just less people in the grocery store per square foot.
Okay. Another issue that some people have talked about is that the vaccine is not something we can rely upon to get out of this. We've got to rely on some other issues and or achieve herd immunity. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that before, I believe, too. I think so. I believe we have. The general issue of viruses mutate, right? Viruses mutate, influenza mutates, coronaviruses mutate slower than influenza, but viruses mutate. And with specifically influenza, we're in a constant game of whack-a-mole, where you essentially have to keep making new vaccines for a virus that's mutating faster than you can squash it. Now, the problem is, the faster something spreads, the more chances it has to mutate. And this is actually one of the serious arguments for why you can basically never open up if you want to have a chance at all of beating this thing, which is a non-starter for the economy. But basically, if and when, and this is like assuming the South African variant doesn't work for any of the current vaccines, if and when we get a variant of COVID that all the vaccines don't work for, and we require 2 different vaccines for everyone, that would mean that every single person would have to get 4 doses of 2 separate 2-shot vaccines. Or if we make a single dose, fair enough. But the point is, everyone would need to receive at least 2 vaccines if there's a second strain out there that the first vaccine doesn't work on, which means you have to multiply the entire logistics of the entire vaccine production system, all of the production, all of the distribution, everything by 2. Now, if this multiplies again and we have a third strain, now it's 3 different types of shots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And very quickly, if this thing starts mutating, you hit a situation where it is mutating faster than you can possibly produce the vaccine and distribute it.
Okay,
where
so
you're stuck.
So if we're in the situation where we're all so far sort of waiting for the vaccine, and you're saying that the virus is moving faster in its mutation and infection than we are with our vaccination, what's the solution?
There isn't one. You're stuck in it forever, unless you lock down the entire planet in a military lockdown, which is completely impractical. And that would assume that COVID doesn't transfer to animals, and we've had to eradicate minks. So good luck, right? The reality is that you hit a situation where the common cold kills you at a much higher rate, and it's reality now.
So what you're saying is we're not going to solve this. We're not going to get out of this problem, and so therefore we might as well just open up and achieve herd immunity.
No, because you can't achieve herd immunity. That's the problem. So just like with common cold and the flu, the more infections there are, every time someone gets infected, every time a virus replicates, there is a chance it mutates. So the more people get infected, the more opportunities there are for the virus to mutate. So the faster this moves, the faster you get mutations. Which is the problem. We're seeing large mutations, or like many variants that have already created one that's potentially not working for vaccines during global lockdowns. If we lift those, the mutations happen faster because there's more chances for them to mutate. So herd immunity has just been proven to be not likely. So that's the thing. And this doesn't mean full reopening. What this means is you need to look at, depending on your risk in a country, restructuring your society with whatever's tolerable. This may mean adopting like the Japanese model, where when there's a serious flu or cold going around, it is culturally normal that you're in masks, period. And if you look at what the numbers are in Japan, accounting for the fact that they don't really do lockdowns there, there is some serious argument for making it culturally normal to have sanitation be very important and for masks to be around.
So right? We're going to be wearing masks all the time forever?
Well, if we don't want people to die of viruses at the same rate. And it doesn't necessarily have to be forever all the time, but whenever there's a major outbreak, whenever there's a major upsurge in this, just like they do in countries that are forward thinking for public health. Now, look, would you rather do that or have, frankly, the elderly die in droves, or have the government panic into lockdowns cyclically?
Well, and this is another argument that some of the people say, is that we're doing a bad job with the whole population because we're closing us all down, when what we really should be doing is focus far more on the elderly and those with compromised immune systems.
Right. There's a few issues there. In general, yes, I agree. I think that we should be doing considerably more for long-term care. Everyone in emergency management basically has been, our pet peeve is the vulnerable that don't get assisted, that repeatedly get killed by things. And when you deal with large sweeping disasters, it's disproportionately always basically orphans, the elderly, and the poor that just get killed by basically everything. So yeah, we should be doing more for them. However, the harsh reality here is that Canadians, North Americans culturally don't tend to care about their elderly. And we don't fund it. We've been ignoring long-term care for over 30 years. It's been an open secret in the healthcare system, in public health, that they're going to die and we don't have funding and nothing can be done. Right? There is, even when there's political will, there's no political will.
Oh, Alex, you're very depressing.
Well, am I wrong? I'd like to be wrong. But okay, there are tons of things you can do to fix long-term care. Tons of things you can do. If you really want to fix long-term care, you could basically have all of the people who work there live in long-term care, pay them 3 times the wage so that they want to volunteer to live with the people, and have the military drop off all their food through basically a quarantine airlock. Congratulations, you've made basically an airtight system. You've kept out COVID. Now, find a whole bunch of people who want to live in long-term care homes. Live, never leave. And then to look at the legality of creating that as a workplace. Now, it'll work. It's been done in other countries. It's been known for over a decade. You can do it.
Where's it been done in other countries?
I forget where, I have to find it, but it's easy to verify. I believe a few people did it in the States too. It's usually people volunteering. It's not like wide sweeping policy. It's a bunch of people seeing the people they're taking care of dying and saying, you know what, we're done with this. Let's live in and make sure that they're safe.
So the other criticism that has been leveled is that we're in an environment where it's almost untenable to question the experts. That it's cancel culture. That if you have a point of view that's different than the experts, you're going to get closed down. And we live in a democratic society, and everyone should have a right to their own point of view. What do you think about that?
In general, yes, but it depends. So so this is there's two answers here. In general, yes, people have a right to their own point of view. However, when not everyone has a right to their own point of view operationally. So, and let me explain this out. This is specific to emergency preparedness and to military operations when you have things on a short timetable and you need to make decisions. So if you're part of the decision group, if you're part of the group that is deciding what's going to happen, there is a time to disagree. Now, ideally, the decisions are made in a fairly open area where, or like an open brainstorming area where people can voice their concerns, and then someone who is in charge makes the judgment call, and that's what you're going with. Once the judgment call has been made in an emergency structure, deviating from that judgment in any way often causes more harm than doing anything else. So you're not entitled to an opinion when the general says march. Now, it's different if you're someone watching the army or if you're the soldier. That's kind of the way you think about it.
Right.
Does that make sense? It doesn't sound very nice, but in other words,
follow instructions.
Well, and within reason, right? So it's one thing to say, hey, this is a risk, might we want to course correct, as opposed to let's turn around. Because once you turn around, you can't turn around again. The chaos that is caused when you have someone in the decision structure that openly dissents and forces you to course correct and go 180 creates so much upheaval, you cannot 180 back onto your course. So doing so in any way is really, really risky from a decision-making point of view. And this is one of the reasons why you have such I don't know if dogmatic's the right word, but such huge restriction on what people are allowed to do to dissent within a political party, within an operational structure like this. And it's not perfect. It's not good. It's really not democratic. But the point is you need to make a decision in 5 minutes or people die. So certain liberties go out the window, right? It's the system we have. So I can explain that more. I'm trying to give you a
that's
really
good.
distinct
Alex
version.
Vezina, right? CEO of Prepared Canada. Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts with us. We're going to take a break and come back with more in just a minute. Stay with us.